This is an overview of some best practices around building your risk register. Now, I'm going to present a bunch of ideas that we have found to be effective across the thousands of organizations we've worked with. But it's important to note this is just a guideline. You're going to have to take the ideas I share with you and sort out how to best deliver them in your organization. Now, building your risk register is pretty straightforward. The dilemma is that the traditional way of doing a risk register is by interviewing a series of people across your organization, the stakeholders, the key players who should know, and ask them for a list of the risks that they think the company or organization is exposed to. The dilemma with this approach is that, first off, it's based on what people can remember. If they can't remember a risk that even occurred to them because it was too long ago or well managed, it's not going to show up on the list. Or they may be exposed to perhaps what other organizations have experienced or what they've heard about. But again, that's a limited data set. We've also learned that people tend to downplay areas where they think that they can control the event and therefore is not risk. Whether they can actually control it or not, of course, is a different issue. And then finally, it is subject to what I call team think, where based on where the team is going, you plow down one particular avenue and forget another, leaving blind spots, or in some cases you over-focus on some issues and under-focus on others. So here's a better approach. The better approach is to figure out in a broadest sense what are the maximum possible risk categories, not risk, but categories of risk that your organization might experience. And from that, we're going to then go off and capture your current strategy, because your strategy is going to determine the impact of each of those risks. So, for example, if your strategy is about attracting new users or customers, different processes and risks are going to impact you than if you're trying to, say, stay with the same current set of customers, but expand how they use your products. Anyways, once you've captured the strategy, you can then bounce that master list of possible risk categories against your strategy to identify the categories that might impact your organization. And once you've identified those, we can use those two findings to help you build a risk registry. Let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail. There are dozens and dozens of risk frameworks that are available. ISO 31000, COSO, ITIL, COBIT, they're all examples of risk frameworks that have been created by different industry or risk-associated groups. What you're going to do is pick the one that seems to be most appropriate for your organization and use that to create your own list of risk categories. Now, again, this is going to be a checklist. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have risks in these areas or significant risk exposure. Merely, this is a laundry list of possible risk areas. Now, the next step is we have to capture your strategy. And again, there's probably many documents available to you that describe your strategy, whether they're strategy documents, annual reports, the management reports that the executive looks at on a monthly basis. All of those are sources to help you figure out what are your strategic objectives and what are their priorities in this current period. And so I've represented those here as a strategy map. For those of you who have a balanced scorecard, you're familiar with this, identifying the strategic objectives and their weightings. Now let's combine those two things. We should be able to take that list of risk categories and list them across the top of a spreadsheet. Then down the left axis, we'll list those strategic objectives. And we should be able to rate and rank the impact of those risk categories on the strategy. Let's take a look at that in a slightly larger format. So in this case, we've taken a look at risks like funding, capacity, rates, and so forth. And then within each one of those, we're going to take a look at A, the likelihood of that risk occurring. So in this case, a reliability risk in the operational category. And they've given a ranking of 3 out of 5. And then we're going to take a look at the impact on that risk if it were to occur on each of the objectives. So in this case, profitable growth, low-cost producer, build loyalty. And again, it's a scale of 1 to 5. And what we begin seeing is the bar charts represent where risk looks like it's occurring. So if we look horizontally, we can see quality products seems to have a lot of possible risks associated with it. We can also add up these columns, and these Harvey balls describe to us the quartile of risk. So this is obviously in the highest quartile, this is in the second quartile, this is in the first, and here's none. So in this simple technique, we can begin to figure out which categories of risk are most impacting our organization based on the current strategy and strategic priorities. Based on that, we can then build the risk register based on anywhere where we have a significant risk occurring. So that's all there is to it. Taking a broad category, sorting out which categories might be most appropriate for us, bouncing that off our strategy, and then using that to go from the risk category to the specific risk element that's included in the risk register. The following 4 steps will take you through each of these in more detail.